More, I want to bring in Sundeep Gokhale, employment and labor lawyer. Good morning. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
So, what's at the heart of this? What's going on here?
At the heart of it is it's really about keeping employers honest and transparent and creating that open line of communication between an employer and its employees. So I think historically, I think employees assumed employers monitor, or they had a hunch they monitored. And now it really has to put it at the forefront for an employer to say, yes, we monitor, or no, we don't monitor. And if we do monitor, how do we monitor? What do we monitor? Is it keystrokes? Is it physical location? Is it what websites you're visiting during working hours? These are the types that's the level of transparency that is now required for employers in Ontario.
So, what should be included in that policy that employers will now have to send out to people?
Well, a couple things. One is, a statement from the employer on whether or not we engage in monitoring or not. That's first and foremost. And if you don't engage in any monitoring, your policy is going to be pretty short, but you still got to disclose that. With respect to the next steps, it is how do we monitor? So do we use GPS? Do we have some sort of technology in place that ultimately looks at what websites that we monitor, and then going down the chain of, yes, we monitor. What do we monitor for? And that's where the Ministry of Labor has provided some level of guidance, right? Is it keystrokes? Is it emails? Is it websites we visit? Physical location? All of that nature in terms of any type of monitoring. Now, I think the challenge for some employers right now over the last couple of months, as they prepare these policies, is that the Employment Standards Act doesn't define electronic monitoring. So we go to the definition, the definition in the dictionary, which talks about systemic review. And I think here's the important part for employers and employees. Storing and having access is very different than monitoring and having a systemic review. So if you're an employer and you monthly get a report on keystrokes or websites visited, whatever the nature may be, then yes, you're going to have to disclose that. But simply just storing emails and not having a systemic review or something of that nature won't trigger electronic monitoring.
So, does this new policy breach the rights of employees?
Yeah, so I think where this policy really helps employees is it just creates that level of transparency. So this legislation is not intended to limit an employer's ability to monitor or enhance an employee's right to privacy. But what it does do is it outlines all of the circumstances in which an employer does in fact monitor. And I think that's the important part for employees and employers to understand here, is there isn't an enhancement through this legislation and there isn't a limitation for employers as it relates to monitoring.
Do you see this somehow creating a some privacy legislation that gives employees the right to challenge employers on whatever they're doing on their websites, keystrokes, you have it?
For sure. And we do, some other provinces in Canada, British Columbia, Quebec, they have their own privacy legislation which covers the employment relationship, where some of those aspects are in fact covered. In Ontario, we still don't have that. And so, perhaps this is the first step before we introduce, specific privacy legislation as it relates to the employment relationship, but we're not there yet with this legislation.
So then last question, just to wrap this up, Sundeep. When you look at this new policy, who do you think it really favors, the employer or the employees?
Well, I think employers who historically have, had a heavy level of electronic monitoring, and they haven't had to be as transparent about it, I think they're, second guessing or perhaps changing their policies as we approach, today, October 11th, where the policy has to be in place. So I think, historically, there's some employers who have monitored quite a bit, and now because of this obligation to disclose, they've perhaps walked it back a little bit because they don't actually want to put pen to paper as it relates to some of the level of monitoring. So I do think there is a benefit for employees, and anytime there's open and transparent communication in terms of an obligation through a policy, I think it helps employees. So I think that that's a first step, but people need to understand that this doesn't provide any level of enhancement in terms of privacy as it relates to the workplace.
Sundeep, thanks so much. Really appreciate you being with us this morning.